Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Betty Lou Beets? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background in this case, including the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Starting with the background, Betty Lou Beets was born in Roxborough, North Carolina on March 12, 1937. Her family and the community where she lived was greatly affected by poverty. Her parents worked as sharecroppers on a tobacco farm. The cabin where she grew up did not have running water, electricity, or glass in the window frames. Betty was mistreated by several people, including her father. The family moved to Danville, Virginia when Betty was still young. Their financial situation improved somewhat there. Betty contracted the measles and for several days ran a temperature of 105 degrees. Her parents were not sure she was going to survive. As a consequence of having the illness, Betty's hearing was significantly impaired. Betty did not do well in school. She was forced to repeat the 4th grade. Her classmates would often call her names. She was an outcast. When Betty was 12 years old, she started caring for her sister and brother after her mother was committed to a mental health facility for psychotic symptoms. Her father's drinking became excessive at this point. He continued to harm her. In 1952, when Betty was 15, she met an 18-year-old zipper factory worker named Robert Franklin Branson. They would marry on July 18, 1952, just a month after Betty finished 9th grade. The couple had 6 children. When Betty was 31 years old, Robert left her and married another woman shortly after the divorce. Betty started drinking after this. On July 28, 1970, Betty married a man named Billy York Lane. Billy started striking Betty just a few days after the wedding, and this treatment continued for some time. Betty obtained a restraining order against him in October of 1970. They divorced in December of that same year, but they kept seeing each other. In May of 1971, Billy broke Betty's nose. On January 17, 1972, Betty shot Billy with a .22 caliber pistol after he visited her apartment. Betty claimed it was self-defense, but 2 of the bullets struck Billy in the back. Betty was charged with assault with the intention to commit murder with malice, but was permitted to plead guilty to misdemeanor aggravated assault after Billy refused to cooperate with the authorities. So he was no longer interested in seeing Betty convicted. The next month, Betty and Billy gave marriage another try, refusing to let common sense or reality dictate their decision-making processes. I wonder what they wrote for their wedding vows. Like Betty would say, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for shooting or non-shooting. They would be divorced a month later. I think the whole part about being shot really put a damper on the relationship. After this, Betty moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. In 1978, Betty married for the 4th time, although it was only her 3rd husband. He was an auto parts salesman named Ronnie Threckhold. Their relationship was characterized by violence in both directions. On one occasion, Betty attacked him with a tire jack, giving new meaning to the phrase, "I will jack you up." Betty, Ronnie, and her children moved to Dallas, Texas. Betty tried to run Ronnie over with a car, and he moved back to Little Rock, Arkansas. The couple divorced in 1979. On August 27 of that same year, Betty was auditioning as a dancer at a strip club. She already worked there in another capacity. She accidentally removed more clothes than intended during her audition. Essentially, she had a wardrobe malfunction. This was long before any incidents at a Super Bowl. Betty was ahead of her time. Her lack of clothing caused a disturbance. She was arrested for public lewdness. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 days in jail, which seems unbelievably harsh considering the crime. When describing the incident later, Betty would say, quote, "Well, it's a topless place, but I wasn't topless," unquote. Betty married for the 5th time on October 3, 1979, to a roofer named Doyle Wayne Barker. The pair fought regularly. They divorced in January of 1980. Not long after this, Betty was almost killed in a car accident. Damage sustained to her head exacerbated her hearing loss. Betty reunited with Doyle, but they did not remarry. In October of 1981, Betty shot him 3 times with a .38 caliber pistol, killing him. Her daughter, Shirley Stenger, helped Betty bury the body under a storage shed in the backyard. On August 19, 1982, Betty would marry Jimmy Don Beets, marriage number 6, husband number 5. Jimmy Don moved into Betty's trailer near Cedar Creek Lake in Henderson County, Texas. On August 5, 1983, Betty told her son, Robert Branson, to leave the house because she was going to kill Jimmy Don. Robert left the residence as instructed, although he was worried that his mother would end up in prison. Robert returned to the house 2 hours later to find that Betty had been true to her word. Jimmy Don had been shot twice in the head. Robert helped Betty to bury Jimmy Don's body in an ornamental wishing well in the front yard. Betty had asked Jimmy Don to construct a wishing well sometime before so that she could bury his body in it. She didn't tell him a reason, just asked him to dig the well. Essentially, he dug his own grave. Betty called the police on August 6 and reported that Jimmy Don was missing. She had taken some steps to stage his disappearance. Jimmy Don had been prescribed nitroglycerin tablets due to a heart condition. Betty took some of those tablets and put them in his fishing boat. At the same time, Robert removed the propeller from the motor. Betty and Robert left that boat in Cedar Creek Lake. Customers at the Redwood Beach Marina saw the boat drifting and brought it to shore. They found the nitroglycerin tablets, a life jacket, and Jimmy's fishing license inside the boat. They notified the authorities. The police thought that Jimmy Don had fallen overboard and drowned. They searched the lake, but were unable to find his body. The police received additional information in the form of a tip in 1985. This prompted them to arrest Betty Lou Beets for murder on June 8 of that year. They searched her property and found Jimmy Don's body in the wishing well. The well had been filled in. Jimmy Don had been shot twice with a .38 caliber pistol. They also found the remains of Doyle Wayne Barker. Betty was charged with murder for remuneration and the promise of remuneration in connection with the death of Jimmy Don Beets. She was also charged with murdering Doyle Wayne Barker, but she was never tried for that crime. She pleaded not guilty to all the charges. The prosecution had a strong case. The body of Jimmy Don was found buried on Betty's property. Jimmy Don Beets was killed with a .38 caliber pistol. The police had seized a .38 caliber pistol during an unrelated incident. Betty's son Robert and her daughter Shirley testified that their mother told them of her plans to kill Jimmy Don Beets. Robert admitted that he helped his mother bury the body. Witnesses testified that Betty attempted to collect life insurance and pension benefits after the death of Jimmy Don. Betty's defense was the false assertion that Robert and Shirley were the real killers. Betty had a history of mistreatment and abuse that was never presented in her defense. Betty Lou Beets was convicted and sentenced to death by lethal injection. Her conviction was overturned on a technicality involving an ethical breach by her lead defense attorney, but the conviction was reinstated shortly afterward. After many unsuccessful appeals, Betty's execution date was set for February 24, 2000. At 6:18 p.m. on that day, in Huntsville, Texas, Betty Lou Beets was executed. She did not ask for a final meal and had no last words. She was 62 years old. Now moving to my analysis. There's never really been any question about whether Betty Lou Beets was guilty or not. Even her most ardent supporters acknowledge that she shot and killed Jimmy Don Beets, and for that matter, Doyle Wayne Barker. The controversy surrounding her case has always been about her sentence. Should she have been executed? I will take a look at both sides of this issue, the arguments for and against the death penalty in the specific case of Betty Lou Beets. I'll start with the factors that support the decision to execute her. Betty Lou Beets had a history of violent behavior. She attempted to kill 2 husbands before successfully going on to kill 2 others. She was in physical altercations with all of her husbands, although she was the target of attacks as well, which I'll get to in the next argument. She carefully planned out and executed the homicides of Doyle and Jimmy Don. Betty told her daughter that she was going to kill Doyle and her son that she was going to kill Jimmy Don, so this was premeditated in both instances. She prepared in advance a way to dispose of the bodies. In both instances, she stood to gain financially from the deaths and worked diligently to make sure that she realized that gain. At the time she committed both murders, she was not in any danger from the men. This was not self-defense. She repeatedly lied about her crimes. Betty denied committing the crimes, therefore there was no remorse. She claimed that she did not remember what happened. Betty tried to blame the murders on her children, so she remembered that part, just not her own culpability. If she was really being harmed by her victims, why did she blame her children? Why not take responsibility? After being convicted, Betty offered inconsistent accounts of the murders. Betty did not specify mistreatment as a motive until after she was sentenced to the death penalty, although this was likely the fault of her lead defense attorney. Much of the trial focused on Betty's character. The prosecution suggested her character was poor. There was a particular emphasis on her sexual behavior and the way she attempted to attract many men. She would regularly go out to bars and pick up men, even when she was married. Her conviction for public lewdness was part of this strategy to attack her character. Now looking at the case against the death penalty. Betty had a rough upbringing. She was mistreated by several different men throughout her life, including all of her husbands. She had essentially no support in dealing with these people who mistreated her. She was on her own to form a strategy to cope. What she came up with was often maladaptive. Betty sustained hearing loss, which led to her being misunderstood, isolated, and ridiculed. During her appeals, experts said that Betty had post-traumatic stress disorder, battered woman syndrome, and severe learning disabilities. Betty did not have an adequate defense. Her lead defense attorney struggled regulating his intake of alcohol and did not raise her trauma history as an issue. Later, he became a district attorney and would eventually be sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for soliciting a $300,000 payoff to drop a death penalty case against a defendant. So he was trying to collect money in exchange for this person's life. When weighing all the factors for and against the death penalty in this case, in my opinion, life in prison would have been more appropriate than executing Betty Lou Beets. There were multiple notable mitigating factors in this case. I think the reality is that Betty Lou Beets didn't do herself any favors with the premeditated and cruel nature of the homicides. She ambushed 2 different men and shot them repeatedly. It was not in self-defense. She wasn't alleging that she was in danger. She simply wanted their resources. I think what often happens when weighing the justification for the death penalty in a capital murder case is that as more evidence is examined, the truth becomes increasingly clear. Like one can find more support for one theory or the other. But in this particular case, we don't really see one side dominant over the other. There is no clear picture of justice. Betty committed horrible premeditated homicides, but she was also in a cycle of mistreatment that lasted almost her entire life. Did she really have a chance? I think the lesson learned in this case is that a person can be both a perpetrator and a victim at the same time. One narrative doesn't have to be true. Both can be true. Betty was a violent and dangerous criminal who was also the target of terrible and repeated crimes. People have said that if Betty only showed more remorse, if she only accepted responsibility, the outcome would have been different. She didn't do anything to help herself by looking less guilty. I think after years of mistreatment, Betty may have been unable to look at herself as a victim. I don't think the system can expect a person like this, a person who suffered so much, to be able to present as the perfect victim, to perfectly articulate their concerns, their trauma, to be able to explain all the effects of the harm that she endured. I think the analysis has to be deeper. The examination has to be thorough enough to find out what really happened and not worry so much about Betty's behavior, like her lack of remorse. Her view was distorted. She was not a good advocate for herself. I think that was the theme of this case. Until she was sentenced to death, no one was ever on Betty's side. She really was alone in almost every sense of the word. She was isolated from peace, isolated from support, isolated from hearing the world around her, isolated from compassion, and, in the end, she would be isolated from mercy. Those are my thoughts on the case of Betty Lou Beets. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be more intriguing than a wardrobe malfunction. Thanks for watching.